Hi, I'm Josh McGrath.
I'm Andrew Haas.
And this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Welcome back. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment and read a recent comment that was left on one of our videos on YouTube. Probably for most of you, you're not taking the time to scour all our videos to see if anyone's leaving comments, but we get the notifications. And this one was encouraging, so I wanted to read it to you all. This is from user @pparth, and he writes, "Thank you for recording and sharing this. I just found your channel. YouTube and the world very badly needs more of this type of content. I'm married, so this exact content doesn't apply to me, but I'm worried about my son, and seeing this episode makes me happy, thinking that by the time he's older, there's a better chance that he'll be exposed to good values rather than values that would ultimately be destructive in the long term." Well, thank you, pparth, for leaving that comment. Of course, we love hearing from you guys, so feel free to leave a comment on any of our social media channels, or you can send us an email to contact@ardentpursuit.fm. So today's episode is going to be very exciting. We're continuing examining the pitfalls that men oftentimes fall into when they are, pursuing a romantic relationship, when they're in that dating phase. And today's title is called "Who is in Charge, You or Your Emotions?" So, Andrew, what are we talking about here today?
Well, so often these days, relationships are driven by what people feel. And that often leaves them plagued with drama, delayed decision-making, dysfunction.
Yeah, people love the emotional highs and lows. And they feel like that creates a sense of momentum in a relationship. But at the end of the day, that is really just unsustainable and also unhealthy. And today what we're going to do is we're going to examine 5 key questions regarding emotion and relationships. So let's dive in here with question number 1. The question is this: should emotions exist in a relationship?
Absolutely, but emotions should not dictate the relationship, or I would even say the quality of it.
Emotions are created by God, but they shouldn't become your God. Emotions should, not dictate what you do, but they should inform what you do. We've said it before, emotions make great servants, but terrible masters.
Yeah, and something that men need to recognize and be clear on is that while they might not have strong emotions themselves, they often do, just not expressed, but oftentimes the woman or others around them might have stronger emotions. And men need to be careful because emotions are highly motivating.
Yeah.
But you can be motivated in the right direction, or you can be motivated in the wrong direction.
And this is why it's so important to have authority and accountability in your life, because emotions oftentimes lead us astray. Emotions oftentimes are wrong. Emotions oftentimes do not actually help us discern reality well. And in a culture that prioritizes and values emotion above almost anything else, you are what you feel. That's literally what our culture is today. It's feeling over fact in our culture today. Men have to be aware that emotions are important. Let's not shut them all off. But they have to be filtered through authority and accountability to make sure that they're informing you in a healthy way.
And we should just make a side note here that love is primarily not an emotion. And when you're in a relationship and you are thinking, I love this person, which is a good thing.
Yes.
What you need to be careful with is the distinction between I love how they make me feel, or I love when they are around.
Yeah.
That's more of a self-directed, self-fulfilling thing versus loving someone is primarily going to be acting in their best interest.
It's true because, things like, affection and attraction oftentimes have a large emotional component to it. Therefore, people attribute that to equaling love, and therefore love must be emotional. And while you can define love as an emotion, at the end of the day, it really is an action. And we see this actually in John 3:16, probably the most famous scripture, in the Christian faith. For God so loved the world that he gave. His love is defined by the action of giving. And in the same way, in a romantic relationship, our love should be demonstrated not by what we feel, but by what we do.
Right. So if you see a couple saying, we love being together, or, oh, I love this person, it's good to recognize, okay, let's bring some context to this.
It's true. I mean, in one breath, you've got a guy saying he loves hot dogs, and the next breath, he's saying he loves, his girlfriend. So I'm like, well, well, which one do you really love?
Exactly. And so the second question here, what's the difference between drama and emotions?
Ooh. So in episode 12, we talked about drama, titled, This is a Drama-Free Zone. Men, go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. And we've defined it this way. Emotions are a measure of what you feel, whether expressed or not, and drama is behavior driven primarily by those feelings. It's important to distinguish the difference between emotions and drama, because one of the things that we advocate for is little or no drama in your relationship. But what we're not advocating for is the absence of emotions in your relationship.
Yes, emotions inform and drama often incites. And you could think of it this way. Drama is the unhealthy application of emotions to the situations around you.
I love that. And people who love drama aren't going to like that question or how we're talking about it, which is ironic because
they're the ones that need it.
They're the ones that need it. All right, so question number 3 here. What does it look like to be driven by emotions?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways that this can play out, and we've listed a couple of them here. To start, it could be making impulsive decisions.
Yeah, things like, even being in the relationship that you're in right now. A lot of people kind of, because, the stars align, their feelings align, the weather aligns, they saw the perfect movie together, suddenly they're like, we should date. How often do we see this in TV shows and movies? What we should do? We should move in with each other. And it's like, it's so impulsive. Or you'll see people just, impulsively get engaged or married or break up because they're like, oh, I just had a bad day. We had a fight. And like impulsively, they're like, well, we don't belong together. So I just broke up with them. And it feeds that sense of drama that exists in so many relationships today.
Yeah, this is clearly what not to do. Impulsive decisions never work out well.
They never do. Another area where we see this played out is overreacting to small issues. I mean, how often does that occur in a lot of romantic relationships?
And the tricky thing here is we often don't know what a small issue is, or we think something's a big issue when it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think care needs to be taken, and I'd say put effort into asking others. Like, I think it's totally fair to ask people, am I overreacting? Was that an overreaction?
Yep.
Because often we think we have an appropriate response, and there's a good chance it's too much.
Yeah, it's disproportionate to the event, to the person, to the conversation, to whatever has occurred. And men need to make sure that they're measured in their response, which we'll get to a little bit later.
Yeah, and then there is being easily offended.
Oof. I'm pretty sure I'm offended just hearing you talk about being easily offended.
You and everyone else watching.
Yes. And the irony is the people who are looking for offense, guess what? They're always going to find it. Too often, people in our culture, and this is partly a result of a consequence of being such an emotionally driven culture, of putting emotions on a pedestal and saying basically they are your God and they should dictate how you feel. They should dictate what you think. They should dictate your life. You are what you feel concept. The problem with that is, guess what? If someone does anything that in any way might cause you to feel not exactly whatever, you can be offended. And so we live in the snowflake generation where everyone and their neighbor is offended. Silence is violence. I'm like, okay, so what I say is wrong and that's offensive, but if I don't say something that is also wrong,
Can't win.
You cannot win.
So I think what people need to be careful of is too often we take things spoken to us or about us as in a perceived harmful way. And I would say take the approach of, it's probably for my benefit. I might not see it, but someone is likely trying to help me, if not in a direct way.
I think that every single man should conduct himself and live his life in a way where he is not easily offended. I mean, I think about my own life. Like, I think I've been offended once, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, something like that. Because like life is too short to be offended. And if you're looking for offense, you're going to find it. But men should not be looking to be offended. Men should be looking to live their lives in such a way where it's like, yeah, who cares what you say? Who cares what you think? My life isn't impacted by something someone says. I'm living for something so much bigger.
And too often, situations in life are not in clear offensive and non-offensive. It's not like there are two buckets where most situations fall into. Usually it's just life and it's our interpretation of it.
Yeah.
Is this offensive? Well, it is if I think it is.
Yep.
Is this unoffensive? Well, if I don't think it's offensive, then sure.
Exactly. So the next area that we've identified is jealousy and possessiveness.
And I think the key idea here is an overarching theme of this. There are times where those feelings could serve a purpose.
Sure.
But if that's the overall tone, there's probably something within yourself that needs to be dealt with or looked at.
Because I think about the idea of, let's say, you're dating, you're part of a local church, and he's talking to, a woman that he's known since, I don't know, for years or since his childhood. And his girlfriend, after church is like, hey, I saw you talking to Betty. So what? Do you think she's pretty? There's clearly an underlying jealousy that is within her. Hey, if you're curious, sure, have an open and honest conversation. Ask what they were talking about. But we need to remember that as Christians, and even if you're not, it's still healthy to have community in your life. You're going to have pre-established relationships. And just because you're in a romantic relationship doesn't mean you're never allowed to talk to someone of the opposite sex. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
And to your earlier point just now, if you were approached saying, hey, it bothers me that you were talking to so-and-so, it's good for a guy to use discernment and use wisdom to try and figure out, okay, what's actually going on?
Yeah.
Do I respond to the current complaint, so to speak? Or is there something else deeper going on here that could be discussed?
I mean, this could be its entire own episode where we could really unpack the idea of like trust issues and, where's the line in gray areas. We're not going to do that. This is a very high level. We're going to open the can of worms and then we're going to move on so everyone else can deal with them.
Exactly.
Of course, if people have questions, they can ask us and maybe we'll do an episode someday on this. Next, constant need for reassurance. This is also something that oftentimes accompanies things like jealousy and possessiveness.
And while early on, we'll just be stereotypical and say the girl needs reassurance and the guy's happy to give it.
Yeah.
That happens, and maybe the guy is more than happy early on. It feels great, loves giving her compliments. That's not a sustainable way forward.
Yeah.
Not only is it not a healthy way to behave or to conduct yourself, but what feels good in the moment for a guy even, and what he might like doing initially, it's actually not sustainable long term.
Yeah.
And so when you get into a pattern or habit early on of something based around a feeling, long term, you're going to have a hard time.
I think about, men who will oftentimes, kind of put themselves down in an effort to kind of draw out from her a compliment of some kind, where he's like, oh, well, I'm no good at working on cars. Meanwhile, he's like a master mechanic. And she's like, no, that's not true, honey. You're amazing. And there's nothing more, unattractive than a man who puts himself down solely for the goal of getting more compliments from others.
Do not fish for compliments.
No. If you're going to put yourself down, do it because you want to make people laugh and you can laugh at yourself.
Yes.
Don't do it because you want others to speak positively of you.
Self-deprecation absolutely has a place.
Yes, it does.
Everyone should practice that.
And if you can't do that, it's probably because you're easily offended. So go back to our earlier point and deal with that.
Yes. But self-deprecate for the right reasons.
Exactly.
And then how about letting your mood dictate the relationship?
Ooh, man, mood swings in relationships are destructive not only to the couple, but to the community around them. There is nothing more destructive to a couple and their relationship and the community around them than these constant mood swings that are almost always dependent upon the most random external factors. When a couple feels like everything's lined up for the day and they woke up on the right side of the bed and they've accomplished all the things they want to, they're like, man, we are madly in love. We're the best couple in the world. This is amazing. And then if one thing goes awry, it's suddenly like, oh, we don't belong together. They're the worst person in the world. I don't even know why I'm dating them. And it's like, no, that's just you being emotionally driven in your decision-making process here. And the relationship should be bigger than how you feel. We've talked about this before. The relationship is headed toward the decision, covenant or not. covenant. And if it's headed towards covenant, it's headed towards a picture that mirrors Christ's relationship with the church. That is so much bigger than how you feel about that relationship.
Yeah, as you're on that road headed toward possible covenant, what you need to realize is if you're feeling great, it doesn't make you in more of a relationship. And if you're mad at the other person, you're not in less of a relationship.
Yeah.
You're still on that road. And so allowing your feelings to dictate, how close you feel to somebody, that's, be really careful. Because eventually, you're starting to model, at least in a very small way, what eventually could be in marriage. And in marriage, you're going to be married whether you feel like it or not. And so early on, be real careful about letting your emotions dictate if you feel like you're in a relationship or not.
The irony of people who believe that love is simply an emotion is the fact that because they're driven by their emotions in their relationship, they'll go from one day being like, I'm in love, to the next day being like, well, I'm not in love. And I'm like, what is your love based upon? How you feel? Because that can change pretty dramatically. And I'm like, if your love is solely based for a person on how you're feeling about that person in that moment, guess what? That's not love at all.
No, it's not. And so our fourth question here, what do unhealthy emotions look like in a dating relationship?
Well, everything that we just talked about are examples of, unhealthy emotions. But we're going to dive in a little bit more. And again, we're really kind of zeroing in on men here. I think the first thing that comes to mind for men is that you react to things around you rather than taking in the information, processing it, and responding in a way that is appropriate to the event.
Yeah, for men categorically, and I'll even lump women into this, but we're speaking to men here, it's really good to get in the mindset of respond, don't react. Just as a life principle.
And men are so good at, escalating situations. Again, it's in the movies, it's in the TV shows. You'll see it on a Friday night at a bar where one guy, bumps another, and then the next one's like up in his face, and the next one pushes him. And it's like, we are very good at taking something that really doesn't matter and escalating it to a very high level of probably self-destruction. And so men need to learn how to respond in a way that is healthy and mature. But so many men are emotionally unhealthy that what we see is just reactions to conversations, to the girl that they're dating, to the culture around them, to their job, and to life as a whole.
And another way that emotions can be unhealthy in a relationship is, I would say more for the guy again, not knowing why you're feeling what you're feeling. Now, it's fair enough to say that I don't know why I'm feeling a certain way, but to leave it there and to not put effort into trying to figure out why you're feeling a certain way, I think that's the error.
It's true. I mean, again, I've never sat around really processing, super deeply, journaling my little heart out in a field of daisies while braiding my hair, why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. That's just not something. But are there moments in time where, particularly in relationships with other people, whether it's an authority figure, whether it's a family member, whether it's, a friend, where there's something that feels off and I'm uncertain why I feel that way. Why do I feel off towards this person? I've had moments like that where you do have to take a moment and you do have to evaluate, why am I feeling this way? And sometimes you realize it's because of either a conversation or a situation or something they did or something you did. And you need to process that in a healthy way to hopefully restore that relationship. But yeah, it's not good to just be like, oh, whatever, I just feel off, so I'm going to react and just not hang out with that person from now on because I feel off about them. It's like, well, no, they're your friend, they're your family member, they're an authority figure in your life. Well, deal with that. Men are called to do hard things.
Yes. And how about this one? things often escalate in the environments you find yourself in.
That reminds me of of like Taylor Swift, where she's always like, I date all these guys and guys are just terrible. And I'm like, well, you've dated like 900 men. So my guess is they're not the terrible ones. I mean, I know they give you new albums that you make millions of dollars off of, but if anything, I feel like they're actually really good for you. But yes, for men who constantly find themselves in an environment where there's drama, where there's tension, where there's an escalating environment, like, that could be you.
It could be. Even if not directly, which is possible, but even indirectly, you could, maybe say, oh, well, whenever it's always there's so-and-so else is around as well. And so it's probably them. It's like, well, no, you're present. And if things are escalating with you around, there's a role for you to play.
Yeah. Now, here's one that will be controversial to some people. You as the man meet or join the woman you're dating in her emotional state. As we've talked about before, women experience the world through an emotional lens in a way that men do not. She's going to be feeling things much more often than you are. She's going to be feeling things much more deeply than you are. She's going to be feeling things that like you probably could never even articulate as a feeling. And so what is very unhealthy is for the man to actually join her always in what she's feeling.
And what I've seen more often than not, actually, is that women they don't often enjoy staying in those emotions they feel. Women often welcome help toward processing and managing emotions. And so for a guy to come and, be with her in an emotional state, perhaps briefly, but really the role there for him is to help her process and manage and ultimately bring her to a better place.
Yes, for sure. And the other thing that we've identified here as just an unhealthy example of emotion is when your emotional state as the man is directly impacted or dependent on external factors. So, your work, how much money you're making, how nice a car you drive, I don't know how many social media friends you have, how, much you work out. Your relationship with your girlfriend, whatever else, the culture and politics, weather. Your state as a man should not be directly impacted by external things. Doesn't mean that you aren't aware of them. Doesn't mean that they don't play a role in your life. But if like every day you find your emotional state disrupted because something didn't go your way, because on your way to work, someone cut you off and now you're just angry and frustrated for the rest of the day, ready to bite everyone's head off. It's like, okay, there's a problem with you. That should not influence you that much.
And the way that a guy should approach it is, to those examples you gave, that should motivate him toward action. That should motivate him toward work. Finances. If you're upset about your finances, okay, let that motivate you toward working more hours or working another job or, relationships. If there's something about the relationship that you're not happy about, instead of letting the emotions get there, think about, okay, what can I do to improve the situation?
Absolutely. So our final question here that we're going to ask is, what do healthy emotions look like in a relationship? We've talked a lot about what unhealthy emotions look like. So now let's flip the coin and say, what do healthy emotions look like?
Yeah, well, to start, the low-hanging fruit's going to be knowing why you're feeling what you're feeling. And again, it's not always clear on the front end, and that's okay, but men need to be intentional about putting in effort to understanding why they're feeling what they're feeling.
Yes, definitely. Another way for healthy emotion to be displayed in a romantic relationship is for the man to anticipate that the girl he's dating is going to have different emotions than him, and probably way more often than him. And I think probably one of the biggest breakdowns in romantic relationships are when women don't understand why guys don't feel what they feel all the time, and for guys to be confused by the fact that women feel things all the time.
Yes. And the problem that men often face, they either go one of two ways, and both are problematic. They will go the route of, she is so emotional, I have no box for what she's feeling, and it's dismissive.
Yeah.
it's probably just a feeling and she'll get over it, and they dismiss it. The other thing that guys will do is allow those emotions to dictate or influence their decision making.
Yeah.
And I would say both are problematic.
Yep.
What a guy needs to do is recognize she's experiencing something that I might not ever experience, but it's real, and using that to properly move forward, but not using her emotions or her emotional state to primarily direct where you are going.
So I want to build off that idea, and this is going to be controversial. So to our earlier point, if you're looking to be offended, you're going to be offended. So that's your warning. In a dating relationship, it is not the responsibility of the man to make sure the woman is emotionally healthy. Now, obviously, in marriage, the role changes a bit, but we've talked about this before. If she's a believing woman, she needs to turn to the Holy Spirit to find her emotional support. She needs to turn to older, married, mature, healthy women to find her emotional support. She needs to turn to healthy, mature friends to find emotional support. Obviously, in marriage, the husband is going to play a role in that, but he is not the sole form of support. But in a dating relationship, that is not the role of the man. He is not supposed to become her emotional crutch, her emotional support animal, so to speak.
And that is something that men need to be really clear on, because as you said, when you're dating, there are certain things you're working toward,
Sure. Yep.
but there are certain things that will only become a reality in marriage. And so as a husband, there are certain things you will do that you will not do during dating, no matter how close you are, no matter how close to marriage you are. And so that's nuanced, and that takes some discussing, and that could be a future episode, or if guys are uncertain about that, talk to somebody, because men need to be clear on, is this appropriate for dating, or is this something that I'm supposed to walk in as a married guy?
Absolutely. And another way that men can display healthy emotion in a relationship is by being emotionally independent. If a guy's emotional stability is dependent upon being in a relationship, which sadly all too often there are many men out there who are walk around like Eeyore unless they're in a relationship. And then once they're in a relationship, they're like Tigger. And I'm like, the whiplash that I have to experience with some of these guys, I'm like, stop being an emotional idiot. Your emotional stability is not dependent upon your status of relationship. If you're single, live for Jesus. If you're in a relationship, live for Jesus. If you're married, live for Jesus. The goal is to live for something bigger than your emotional satisfaction. The goal is to live for something eternal. And men need to recognize that their emotional stability is not dependent upon anything other than relationship with Jesus. And guess what? He died for you on the cross. You need nothing else now to be emotionally stable.
Very well said. Yes, men need to be well practiced in using their emotions to direct and help inform, but clearly don't allow it to influence your state of being. And being patient is another way that you can show healthy emotions in a relationship.
And that is going to be needed because guess what? Patience is not only a virtue, but if you're in a relationship with a woman, I mean, if you've ever had, a mother, a sister, a girlfriend, a wife, or a daughter, or a friend who's a woman, you're going to find out that you're going to need patience in interacting with them because guess what? Shocker. You're very different and you see the world very differently. And patience will benefit you in all areas of your life, not just in relationships, but in every aspect of your life.
And so often, and I can speak from personal experience, clarity comes from just exhibiting some patience. So often, not all the time, but enough, where if you can just take a pause, take a minute, take some time, patience often can bring about some clarity and really help navigate which emotions are valid and which ones might not be appropriate.
And part of what comes out of, patience is this idea of being understanding, which is another way that men can exhibit healthy emotion in a relationship. They need to be understanding of differing perspectives, of differing feelings, of differing thoughts, all without it triggering something inside of them where they react. And in conversation, so much of a relationship, whether it's romantic or not, is conversing with one another. And so you need to be understanding of one another. That is going to be extremely important in any type of romantic pursuit that a man has.
And being grounded, I think, is the final point we'll touch on here.
Yeah.
It is so important for men to be grounded. It's really harmful to a guy and then to those around him when it could be, a voice on YouTube. It could be
Our voice on YouTube.
could be ours. It could be, it could be a preacher somewhere. It could be, influential friend or coach.
Yeah.
Men can be swayed by the opinions or viewpoints of those around them, and certainly, evaluate what's around you, take in the good. But being grounded, I think, just speaks to knowing what you believe, knowing why you believe it, having a set of principles, having things that you can live your life by that don't really change.
I like to think of the analogy of a bulwark, which are like, the giant stones that are set at the edge of the land by the ocean so that the ocean doesn't erode the land. And that bulwark guards and protects the land from the sea. And whether the sea is totally placid and calm and it's a sunny day and it's just lapping against the rocks, or it's a terrible hurricane storm where it's crashing over the rocks, the bulwark doesn't change.
Doesn't care.
It's still grounded. It's still right there, operating as it should. And for men, in the context of, in family, in relationship, and in culture, we are called to protect, we are called to provide, but we're also called to confront the lies, the deception, the evil that exists around us. Why? To protect women, to protect children, to preserve the family, and to preserve our culture.
Well said. So what can we do about this?
Yeah, so as men, you're probably hearing a lot of this and being like, oh my gosh, what do I even do now? There are three areas that we're going to examine briefly here as far as practical steps that men can take. So the first area is you should not see the world through an emotional lens. The second is you do not need to be controlled by your emotions. And third is a process for managing your emotions. So starting here with number one, you should not see the world through an emotional lens. As we've talked about, men and women experience emotions differently. Men should not look at the world through an emotional lens. That is unhealthy and unhelpful for men.
And something that men need to have a real firm grasp on is that women are going to experience emotions differently than men do. And there may be things that men never experience. Doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah.
And so, I think of childbirth. My wife has done that numerous times. And she has experienced something in life that I will have no experience with remotely.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yep.
And so she's gone through things and she's experienced things that I have no firsthand experience with and never will. And I think there's a parallel. Women have this capacity for emotions often that men don't have.
Yes.
And men can be dismissive because it's like, that's not my reality. That's not something that I'm familiar with, so it can't really be that real.
And it's not about one being better than the other. Part of the problem that our culture faces today is, we've got a very feminized culture. And as a result, we are trying to feminize men and turn them into a version of a woman where it's like, no, you need to be more emotionally vulnerable. You need to cry more. You need to experience things on a visceral, emotional level constantly. And it's like, well, no. And because of a feminized culture, it's like, well, that is kind of what's heralded as good and as right and as healthy. But it's not about that being for all men. What it's recognizing is that women and men are different. Shocker, YouTube's going to remove us for that one, all right? Women and men are different. Women are going to experience things on an emotional level that men are not. That's okay. The goal isn't to say women be like men and don't be emotional. The goal also is not to say men be more like women and be more emotional. The goal is to recognize there is a difference. That's a God-designed difference, and that those can work together in harmony.
And that's a mark of a healthy man. Someone who is not given to emotion and someone that doesn't dismiss it, but can take in what's around him, process it in a healthy way, and help move things forward.
Yeah, he's going to experience emotions differently than her. And as men, we need to recognize that. We don't need to apologize for that. We don't need to feel bad about that. However, we've got to guard ourselves against stoicism. I think historically, men have come to believe that they don't feel or they don't need to feel.
Or feeling is somehow feminine.
Yes, yes, exactly. Feeling is equals being feminine. That's not the case at all. When we look at scripture, we see, particularly through the life of Jesus, a lot of different emotions expressed throughout his ministry. But what men need to recognize is that stoicism is the thing they need to refrain from, but they don't need to then go the polar opposite and be crying at every sunset and sunrise and every time a new baby's born. Like there is a healthy balance there. And one of the ways that men can actually find that healthy balance is by looking to married men in their lives who are emotionally healthy. Whether that may be your father, a pastor, an authority figure, a mentor, maybe even a good friend of yours. And this is why having community, why having authority and accountability in your life is so important as a man, because you can see that exhibited and displayed in a variety of other men. So it's not like you're trying to figure out, how do I do this thing called emotion as a man?
Yes, and the second point here, you do not need to be controlled by your emotions.
Come on, say it to the person in the back.
Being controlled by your emotions versus using your emotions to inform.
Yeah.
And I think guys need to really nail that one home.
We tend to, as men, default to being controlled by the, aggressive emotion, by the anger emotion, by the, fine, I just won't, talk to you, and, I'm going to be the lone wolf and I'm going to figure this thing out on my own. I'm the alpha male. I don't need anybody, emotion. And men that's a reaction is what that is. And so while we shouldn't be controlled by our emotions, like you said, we should recognize that they do help inform our behavior. They shouldn't become our behavior.
So let's talk about number 3, a process for managing emotions.
Okay, so there's probably a lot of self-help books out there, and probably a lot better podcasts than ours that help walk men through a process on how to manage their emotions. These are some thoughts that we have that I know we've implemented in our lives, and these are just recommendations. This is not diagnostic in any sense of the imagination. So start here with number 1: acknowledge the emotion you feel. Men, you feel. That's okay.
And if you don't, you should.
If you don't, you should. Number 2, subject your emotion to critique. Is it true? Is it good? Is it right? Men have a unique ability to analyze our emotional state through a theological lens, through a logical lens, through a cultural lens. We don't always do that, though. And we have to remember to always subject what we feel to that lens.
And there are so many blind spots here that men often do evaluate correctly their own emotional state, but oftentimes no. And so having people around you, leave that door open. Leave the door open for people to speak into your life and help guide you and bring you along to a place of healthy emotions.
Absolutely. Number 3 is submitting what you feel to the Lord. Regardless of what you feel, whether good or bad, as a believer, it is so important to make sure that we're submitting those feelings, those thoughts to the Lord on a daily basis. That's just part of the Christian walk. And number 5 here is collaborate with your authority and accountability on a course of action. It is hard for men sometimes to take next steps. We can identify problems. We can even identify solutions, and then we just passively sit by and we never act on it.
That is the eternal challenge that men face.
Yes.
Engaging, stepping into a situation, into an environment that's uncertain or has lack of clarity. We need to move into those situations. And when it comes to our emotions, we might be not emotional enough. Maybe there's something we need to actually work on.
Sure.
And I think having a mentor, an accountability person in our life, they can actually help us inform, hey, this is something you could work on.
Yeah.
Conversely, if emotions are running rampant and they need to be, reined in, that's really good to know.
Yeah. So finally, number 6, act accordingly, even if the action doesn't match what you feel. And I love Psalm 35, verses 9 and 10. The psalmist David writes, "My soul will rejoice in the Lord and be glad in his deliverance. All my bones will say, Lord, who is like you." I love that because David is saying, my soul will rejoice. I don't care what my soul feels. My soul will rejoice. And then he says, my bones will. I don't care what my bones are feeling. My bones will. And as men, part of our role and responsibility, part of healthy masculinity, part of being a mature man is telling your soul, telling your bones that you will do what is right. You will do what is good. You will do what is healthy, even if you don't feel like it. That's not up for debate. Men have a role to do what is good, what is right, what is healthy always.
And that's what men need to really, that's what we want to really emphasize here for men listening, to practice doing things, practice moving forward, even if you're not feeling it.
Yeah, and that is really hard for men. It's hard for me. It's not like, being a man suddenly magically makes you amazing at always doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Men miss the mark all the time. The goal isn't to be perfect in walking this out. The goal is to recognize the calling, and when you miss the mark, to repent and to realign and to begin pursuing that call once again. Mm-hmm. So as we conclude here, for those of you who are already in a relationship or those of you who are single, what we want you to do today is to really kind of do a self-analysis, which can be very hard for men. We're not great at reflecting on ourselves, particularly when it comes to emotion. And here's what we want you to do. Make 2 columns. And at the top on the right, write down, healthy emotions. On the left, write unhealthy emotions. And kind of just go through everything we talked about today and just put into the columns, where you exhibit healthy emotion and where you exhibit unhealthy emotion. For anything that ends up in the unhealthy column, process that and ask yourself, why do I exhibit unhealthy emotion there? And then sit down with your authority and accountability and talk through how you can walk through that in a healthy way so that you can, pursue that calling that all men have to respond well, to respond healthily, and to respond in a godly, mature way. As always, we love having you here on the Art of Pursuit podcast, and we look forward to having you here next time.